After finally completing the first Berserker Khazan, I can confidently say it's one of my favorite and potentially one of the best non-FromSoftware Soulslikes I have ever played. And I've played them all. It's up there with Neo 2, even Lies of P. And although it doesn't achieve the same levels of greatness that the FromSoft games themselves do, it emulates that formula in an extremely good way. And while this game doesn't bring anything new or groundbreaking or revolutionary to the Souls-like genre, it focuses on the core fundamentals of this genre and what actually needs to be good for these type of games to be very enjoyable. The combat is fast, reactive, and impactful. The progression is meaningful throughout the entire game. The enemy density is perfect. The level design, in general, does not feel monotonous. Most importantly, the bosses are incredible. But before we get to the full review, thank you guys so much for over 1,100 subscribers. The support has been incredible lately, so I really appreciate you guys. If you are new to the channel and you like gaming news and gaming reviews for RPGs and other games I'm interested in, please like and subscribe if you like what you see here. Now let's get into the video. To preface, the first Berserker Khazan is from Nexon, which is going to raise red flags, but I promise it doesn't do this game any disservice at all. There's no microtransactions or BS in here. On top of that, if you guys have played games from this series, this is part of the Dungeon and Fighter universe. I haven't played any of them, but I kind of want to now. But it's really that series' first foray into this type of game. So this game starts off with a short prologue that doesn't necessarily even, in my opinion, feel like a prologue. You're going to originally get introduced to your main character, Khazan. He's going to get possessed by some phantom, and without any spoilers, you basically work together with this phantom to reach your ultimate goals. It's more or less just a revenge plot, and although the story isn't necessarily anything to write home about, it does its job to give you a reason to go to the next area, clear the enemies, and fight the next boss. But the reason I say this doesn't really even feel like a prologue is because you're going to be doing right at the start of the game exactly what you're going to be doing all the way at the end of the game, and that's going, resting at what I'm just going to call it a campfire. You're going to be resting at the campfire, and then you're going to be going through the map, fighting enemies, finding different hidden loot throughout the map, circling back and opening a door to go back to your campfire to unlock a new area, and then going and keep doing the same thing until you fight the boss. That's what the prologue is. That's what every level until the end of the game is. But this is far from being a bad thing. Yes, in the prologue, you're going to get some direction on how the game works, how the combat works, etc. But mainly, you just get thrown in to the world of Khazan, and I absolutely love it because the fun starts the second the game starts. But another thing that this prologue does well is introducing the player to how the level design is going to specifically work in this game, and it's very similar in other Souls games, but it is important if someone's playing this game as their first one. Because from this point forward, there's really not much change in terms of the level design. It's extremely linear from the start until the end of the game with very little branching paths. And that's not to say there aren't any hidden chests or items throughout these maps. There are some chests that are relatively hidden for obviously good loot. There are certain items that you can get that I'll kind of explain later when we get to the progression that you can find. There are these guardian stones or guardian crystals that if you find enough of them, you can increase the amount that you heal with your netherworld energy, or basically Estus flasks, this game's equivalent to that. Or you can even increase the amount of lacrima or souls that you get from certain kills so you can level up faster. And it is very important to explore these maps in full, because if you do, you get points to put towards your overall damage or your damage multiplier, or even the stamina damage you do on enemies. Although I will say one thing about the level design that I didn't really love is it really doesn't evolve with the player very much. Like I mentioned earlier, the same level design you're getting at the start is very similar to what you're going to be getting at the end. Yes, there are going to be some different ways and complexities that they add into the game to change it up, like jumping out of an elevator as it's going up to reveal a certain part of that map or certain part of that area. There's also going to be things like levers that might decrease the water levels that you have to then go back on or something like that. But overall, it's pretty standard, it's pretty linear from start to finish, and I wish it evolved and got at least a little bit bigger as the player gets more experienced with the world. Another thing that doesn't necessarily have to do specifically with the level design, but is extremely annoying that I don't really understand why this game does, is that if you leave an area and you go to another area, then you realize those crystals I was talking about, you didn't get all those in the previous area, or you didn't fully complete it to get those items to increase your damage or your damage multiplier, etc. from that area. It restarts the whole area. Yes, you're still going to have your campfires or your sites of grace or whatever they call them in this game. However, you still have to unlock everything over again. For example, that little lever that I was talking about that decreases the water level, yeah, you have to go back and hit that again. If you go to a further site of grace, you can't go back because you might have had to open that door from behind. So then you still have to go through the level and do that again. And I don't know why all of these different routes and all these different connections get completely reset just from leaving that area and going to a new one. It does warn you about that, absolutely, so be warned, it will say that. However, I wish the player could choose to do this on their own and choose to reset the area on their own without it doing it automatically, so you can go back and find these relatively important things that you might not have found the first time through. So if you do beat a boss and haven't fully explored or completed a certain area, don't move on to the next one yet. Just stay in the one you're in, try to find everything that you can and complete that area in full before you move on, or it's going to be very, very annoying to do it afterwards. But in general, some of those grievances aside, I really do think they do a great job with this level design, albeit, like I mentioned, very linear. It is hard to miss some of those hidden items if you're just exploring normally, but they're not so easy to find that you don't have to be paying attention to find them. So it does strike a good balance between having to pay attention and having to explore, but also not getting super confusing or monotonous and losing where the hell you even are. They also do a very good job with enemy density here. They're not throwing 5 ranged mobs, 5 mages, and then enemies that run up and swarm you while there's more of like an elite mob that is attacking you as well. All of these different encounters, they do feel very manageable. And in addition to that, they do a very good job of not placing these sites of grace or these campfires so far from each other. You don't always feel like you're running through all of your health potions and scrounging for that next campfire, although that will definitely happen because of how hard some of the enemies that you fight are, or if you're learning these new enemies, but it doesn't feel to the point where you're consistently just dying before you get to the next rest site. But how are you going to get through these levels? It's by fighting the enemies. And luckily, this is the best part of the entire game, aside from the bosses, obviously. It's the combat. Because the combat in Khazan is S tier. It is so good. No exaggeration here. In my personal opinion, this might be the best Souls-like combat we have ever had, even rivaling and being better than some of the FromSoft games themselves. It is genuinely, or at least it feels like, a mix between Sekiro and Dark Souls 3. And again, no, it doesn't do anything revolutionary, but it is so reactive. It is so impactful when you're hitting an enemy, and it just has some weight to it. And on top of that, it is buttery smooth. The movement on top of the combat is buttery smooth. There is genuinely not a single point in a combat encounter when I don't feel like I have full control over my character. And that is peak importance in these type of games. But what is the combat actually like? So the first thing is you're going to have 3 different weapons. You're going to have dual blades that are going to be 1 axe and 1 sword, and these are going to be your very fast-paced, up-close type of combat. And then you're going to have a spear, which is going to be more medium-paced, but is going to have that range to it. And then you're going to have your big dick slow weapon, the greatsword, which is the weapon I used because I wanted to look like I was coming straight out of the manga Berserk. And all of these different weapons are going to have their own different strengths and weaknesses as you go throughout the game, depending on the different enemies that you're fighting. Unfortunately, you can't mid-combat freely switch between these, which is something that I do think is a little bit of a bummer, but it makes a lot of sense because of the way the progression works in this game, which I'll definitely get to. But aside from these weapon differences, the basis of combat is going to remain the same. You're going to have your dodge, you're going to have your brink dodge, which is basically a perfect dodge, or you're going to have your guard and your brink guard, which is basically a perfect parry. And on top of this, every enemy that you fight is going to have one of 2 things. They're either going to have a stamina bar that's going to work exactly like your yours does, or it's going to have this long purple bar that works a little bit differently than the general stamina bar. So the stamina bar, like I mentioned, it works like the player's does, so it goes up and down depending on if the boss is fighting you or attacking you or just kind of standing still and it's regenerating, but it can get all the way down to nothing. And once that happens, you can do what they call a brutal attack, which you just press circle on them and you do a ton of damage and then their stamina bar resets. Now, you can also get this done kind of on yourself if you run out of your stamina, so you have to be careful of that. But then they also might have something on the boss that is a long purple bar. Not exactly sure what it's called, but it doesn't work the way the stamina bar works. It's not going to go down when the boss is actually attacking you. It only goes down when you hit the boss, and this is going to go down a lot slower, and it's not going to regenerate. So once you get this all the way down to 0, you can do a brutal attack on those enemies. You're also going to have another bar called a spirit bar, which is very crucial for using your ranged attack or using your actual skills. Now, your ranged attack is called the javelin, and this is going to be used to hit enemies from afar, which is very useful if you're getting cooked from a ranger, for example, and you want to just headshot them and critical strike them with your javelin and get them out of there, or by even knocking down items that you're not going to be able to get to on foot. Now, both of these things it is very useful for, but aside from this, the spirit bar is going to be basically how you use all of your skills, so maintaining this throughout fights is going to be very important if you're someone and your build utilizes a lot of these skills to make you a lot stronger, which a majority of them obviously do. And then on top of this spirit bar and those skills, you're going to have an ultimate ability that you're going to unlock a little bit later on in the game where you basically go full phantom mode. And you're not going to be able to actually get hurt, although they do have their own health bar when you change over to this ultimate ability. That's going to gradually decrease or decrease when you get hit. And it's basically a way to get free hits in and kind of save yourself in some really dire moments. And it also has some extremely high-powered attacks. It's almost exactly like a Black Myth Wukong transformation. There also is something called a counterattack, which you can only use in very specific instances. A boss, for example, might have a move that you can't dodge or block, and you have to use a counterattack to be able to get some free hits in after you use that at the exact right timing. So you are going to have to figure out that timing. There's also something you can get in your skill tree called a reflection. So if a boss is swinging a weapon at you, for example, you can swing your weapon back and reflect it and get a couple free hits in as well. So there are a little bit more depths to the combat than just those basics. This is obviously going to be made more complex depending on what gear you're wearing, depending on what weapon you're using, and depending on what build you go down and the different abilities that you choose as well. But what makes it extra fun, aside from how reactive, how fluid, how smooth and impactful the combat is, plus just having good combat in general and having a system that has worked in every single Souls game pretty much ever, are the actual enemies and bosses you're fighting from start to finish in your experience playing this game. Now, starting off with the normal enemies, unfortunately, I still do wish there was more of an enemy variety here. It's not to say there's not a good variety. I just do wish, like, every area you went into, there were completely new enemies. But it's not like that. You are going to be seeing a lot of reused enemies from kind of start to finish, or enemies that might look different that still have very similar attack patterns. But that's not to say they don't do a good job mixing up the different enemies that you're fighting, or mixing up the different harder or like more elite enemies that you're fighting, and they'll still definitely sprinkle in brand new ones as you go throughout the game. You just will see a lot of returning ones as well. But there is definitely enough variety here to where this isn't necessarily a big negative with the game, for example. It's not like Dragon's Dogma 2. There's also going to be elite versions of some of the harder or more elite type of enemies, and these are kind of more like mini bosses that once you kill once, they won't respawn, and you'll get those every once in a while when you're going through the levels. But the most important thing isn't these normal enemies, it's the bosses and how good the bosses are in this game. And in my personal opinion, I think the bosses are absolutely incredible. Every single boss that you fight in the main story, again, in the main story, and there are a lot of them, are completely unique and distinct from each other. And all of their movesets feel very different, and how you fight them does feel very different. There's a learning curve on each and every single individual boss. I will say, though, that the bosses will borrow like 20%, maybe 10% of their movesets from enemies that you have fought before. And this is, I think, just to kind of ease the learning curve into these bosses in their first couple attacks, or at least in their first phase. So you will notice a couple of the same type of attack patterns here that is going to enable you to either dodge or parry them a little bit easier. But Again, the other 80% of the boss's movesets are completely different, so I don't think this is a negative. Honestly, I think it is a good thing, and it kind of just eases you in, and it is something you recognize, at least when you're fighting a boss for the first time. One thing that I actually love about these bosses in particular is each of them feels like there's a different learning curve and a different wall that you have to pass to be able to beat them by mastering a different mechanic. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, there might be one boss in this game that you can't really dodge very well, and you have to use your Brink Guard to be able to reduce their stamina and be able to get free hits in on them, and then be able to kind of trivialize the fight and make it a lot easier. But there might be one that's completely opposite. You can't really Brink Guard very well, and they have very unpredictable patterns, but you can potentially dodge and get away from them and get free hits in that way by getting perfect dodges. Now, there are also some bosses that you have to be very aggressive on. There also are some bosses that you have to be very defensive on, and you have to kind of maneuver them that way. There's some that where you use that reflection ability that I talked about earlier, and that's going to be very useful for making the boss a million times easier. There was one boss specifically I was fighting, and I'm like, I just can't beat this damn boss. I went and I respect, and you can do this completely for free, and I put more points in that reflection ability, and I cooked the boss by learning how to reflect and what moves I could use reflection on. On top of that, there's some bosses that you're going to have to be mastering the timing of your counterattack, and that's really the only chances you're going to be able to do damages on. There's other bosses that you might have to re-gear for more resistances on your character, and that might make it a lot easier, or maybe even using a different weapon and changing your build for a new weapon and trying that out, because that weapon might make the boss a million times easier. They designed a lot of these bosses to teach you about a different sector of the game, to where you're going to have to kind of master that part of the game, and if you do, it makes the boss a million times easier. Now, you can still beat the boss in different ways. The game's not going to say you can't beat it in any way that you kind of want to beat it in, but it's nice that they kind of not tell the player, but push them towards by showing them what the boss does and having to allow the player to react to that to see how they can beat this boss in the best way possible. Now, aside from the main bosses, there are also side bosses in this game. And these are going to come about when you do side missions, and every side mission ends with a side boss. And these side missions are basically going back into the same area you've already completed, going through a very short sector of that area where it's a little bit new, a little bit kind of the same, and then you end up getting to the boss at the end. And I get that these are side bosses, but every single side boss in this game is a reskin. Now, granted, they might have a couple different patterns, maybe one or two new attacks. They might be a little bit more aggressive or less aggressive than a different variant from the actual main storyline of that exact same boss, but they are all reskins. They might have a different name, but they use the exact same attacks as the other main bosses. There's one boss, and it's a lot later in the game in particular, so I'm not going to show it here. I'm only really showing footage from earlier parts of the game because I don't want to spoil all of the bosses that you might be fighting when you actually play this game, if you actually play the game yourself. But there's one boss that is a reskin of, in my opinion, the hardest boss in the game, or at least was the hardest boss for me. And this boss uses two different weapons. One weapon I found a million times easier than the other weapon. The other weapon I really just didn't know when I could attack the boss. The reskin of this boss used the exact same two-weapon combo, except for he just decides to stay in the weapon that's way harder for way longer. So the last like 20% of his health, he barely uses the weapon where you can get attacks in. So you're just fighting for your life and defending until you can finally get attack in after you already did this the first time and it was really annoying and you finally beat the boss. You're like, oh, that's a cool boss. Then you just fight only the annoying parts of that boss all over again. It is definitely frustrating that they couldn't come up with any new side bosses at all. I mean, there are a couple side bosses where you're just kind of fighting a myriad of the normal harder enemies, and they're not really boss fights in general, and those are just like you beat them in 30 seconds and you kind of move on. But just in general, the side bosses and the side areas in general are so short. They reuse the same areas, they reuse the same bosses, and they're extremely underwhelming. Sometimes they're kind of just annoying, and they're just harder for the purpose of being harder than the main areas. Although they do tend to feel easier and be completed more quickly because you have already done it before. Next, I quickly want to talk about the progression in this game because it is very good and there is actually a lot here. So obviously you're going to have your general souls progression where you get souls, or in this game it's called lacrima, and then you can upgrade your stats from there. Different things like vitality, endurance, strength, willpower, proficiency. There's nothing with magic here, but there is basically an agility build or a strength build for the most part. If you increase your strength, it's going to do more attack damage, but your willpower and proficiency might do more stamina damage, or you might take less stamina damage. And then your endurance is obviously going to get your stamina. It's also going to do a little bit of attack damage, and then your vitality is mainly your health and your resistances, which are very important, obviously, as well. Now, aside from this, you're going to have something called your phantom abilities. This is when I mentioned kind of in the story, you have a phantom that kind of possesses you and you work together kind of with those phantoms. So this one is, for example, frontal assault damage, which is going to give me more damage basically if I'm hitting an enemy from the front. And there's a lot of different ones that you can unlock and choose between depending on what build you end up choosing. And then aside from this, there is Khazan's memories, which are basically the map progression. You get different points here if you complete a map in full, and then you can spend these points, for example, on different bonuses like damage increase, multiplier increase, or stamina damage increase. So if I increase this, boom, I got enough points to do that. Now I have more damage multiplier. Now, aside from this, if you see these little crystals in that little jar, those are secrets you can find throughout the map that will allow you to buy certain helmets from this jar NPC that are really funny. And then on top of that, these crystals specifically allow you, like I mentioned, to increase the health you recover from any time you use a health potion, or even increase the amount of echoes or the amount of souls, or in this game, lacrima, that you get for defeating enemies. Now, aside from this, there's even more here, specifically with the gear that's going to be very important. Now, there are different rarities of gear, whether it's armor, accessories, or weapons, and these different rarities are going to have different number of attributes on them, with blue being 1, purple being 2, gray having nothing, red having 3 different attributes on them, etc. And then these are also going to have set bonuses, which are going to increase specifics of your build and the build you're going down. Now, I wanted to do a lot of heavy attack damage and a lot of charge damage, so my build specifically, as you can see, if I get the 6 bonus, it gives me 15% extra damage when I'm doing a potent blow, and 10% extra damage to their stamina if I'm doing a potent blow as well. So I use that build, and I use this armor set, and it worked really well for me. On my accessories, I also have more potent blow damage. Now, this isn't all, though. You also have your skills, which is going to be another way that you're refining your build, specifically on how you play your character. So I went down the greatsword skill trees, and this is basically going to be all increasing my potent blow and getting them off as much as possible and as fast as possible. So I have an ability, for example, that gives me an AoE when I charge up my potent blow, or I charge up my charge attack, which is huge. I have other things that allow me to charge my potent blow or charge my charge attack faster if I have just charged an ability. And all my abilities I upgraded so they could be charged using spirit. Now, I noticed I didn't have a lot of spirit to do this, so in my common tree, which is basically just increasing your character regardless of the different weapons, or regardless of the weapon you use, I upgraded all of my resources to max, so I'm getting spirit by pretty much doing anything, so I can consistently use the highest level of my attacks as possible. I even can charge my normal charge attack multiple times to do even more damage and to have even more stagger against bosses and enemies, and get a critical strike, which does an insane amount of damage and pretty much always stuns them. Now, you can upgrade your brutal attacks, your reflection mechanic, your ranged attack mechanic, your counter attack mechanic, or even your phantom form, and all of these are really useful as well, especially if you're going down builds and have a set bonus that specifically makes these type of things stronger. And again, this mastery level is going to be different than your overall character level. This is going to be used from fighting different enemies and leveling this up separately. You don't have to actually level up your character by getting your mastery leveled up. Your level up is going to be specifically aside from this, and it's going to be only by using Lacrima on your character, and that's how you level up your attributes. This, again, is going to be different than that. There's even crafting here, so as you go throughout the game, you'll find different sets that you can craft, and you can dismantle armor for money, you can dismantle armor for lacrima, or you can dismantle it for actual materials. And if you have enough materials, you can craft a full set if you have found that set out in the world, and this is another great way to specifically make your character exactly how you want to make it. And once you're able to actually make these different sets, it does make the game easier, because then you can always have the build that you want, and then you can continuously just craft a new set of a higher rarity of that specific armor set. Now, really quickly, before I wrap up this video and give my final score, I do want to quickly just say that the music in this dark fantasy environment, and the sounds in general are so damn good. This anime art style that I haven't never really played a Souls-like game with an anime art style. It does it so perfectly. I think one of the reasons this game is so smooth and just feels so good is because they didn't go crazy with the graphics. They went very crazy with a very beautiful anime-inspired art style that fits this world perfectly and fits this dark fantasy environment perfectly, but it also allowed them to focus on things like the actual game mechanics and how the game feels and how impactful it is in general, and I think it's one of the biggest reasons it's buttery smooth and just a really good experience altogether. And aside from the performance of this game being really good, I didn't have any bugs, I didn't have any crashes, I didn't have any glitches, literally nothing. But overall, as I mentioned before, the First Berserker Khazan is one of the best, if not the best Souls-like I have ever played. It is up there at the same level, if not even better than games like Neo or Lies of P or Neo 2. It is much better than most of the other Souls-likes out there that aren't from FromSoftware, like Lords of the Fallen, for example, one of my least favorite games of all time. And that's because it's really not trying to do anything new. It's not trying to revolutionize the genre. It's just trying to make a very good Souls-like game. And in that goal, they absolutely succeeded. When you have some of the best combat this genre has ever seen, you have very serviceable, relatively good level design, and on top of this, some awesome, amazing bosses that are very distinguished from each other and feel like they have their own specific goal within the game, there's nothing not really to like here. And yes, there are things that do hold this game back from being that perfect Souls-like game, for example. We have the reused bosses in the side missions. You have the resetting of the areas when you move on to a new one, which is super annoying. The non-evolution of the level design, at least not evolving in the way that I wanted it to. Even not necessarily having as many enemies as I wanted, reusing a lot of normal enemies as well as you go throughout the game with only sprinkles of new ones here and there. But these things aren't going to hold this game back from being a great game within this genre, and for that, my final score is an 8 out of 10. With the potential to be even higher than that. Something the Souls games do really well is the world building and the lore, which I think this game could do a lot better with. It could also do better with its main story in general, and albeit these games don't have to have that to be extremely good, if they had that, this game could easily get up there to like a 9, for example. And if it fixed all those other issues, this game has the potential to be a 10 out of 10 and one of the best Souls games I've ever played. Now, I would love to hear down below in the comments, what do you guys feel about this game if you have played it? If you haven't played it, does this interest you in trying it out? It's definitely a hard game. It's definitely a Souls game. So if you don't like them, you definitely won't like this game. But again, I would like to hear what you guys thought about this game down below. Did you like it? Did you absolutely hate it? And why? I would love to discuss both of those sides of the spectrum because I have talked to people that definitely don't like this game as much as I do. For my new viewers, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you did like what you see here. And for my returning viewers, thank you guys for the support. Please like this video if you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!